Back at it again with another podcast. Told you guys, sticking to it. We're gonna make these happen. All right, so today's video, you guys, we're talking about. Also, good morning. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, you guys, we were talking about the cars that I've owned. So I've had the F30 328, which was a 2013. I had the E90 M3, which was a 2010. And then I had the M2, which was the N55 M2, which was a 2017. And now I have the 2020 Supra. So how do we compare these cars? How do they stack up against one another? And this is, this is not going to be an easy question to answer by any means, because they're so different. These cars are entirely different from one another. I think what's really interesting though, and like the most important part about it, is the trajectory. So like I started with a car, that I really didn't intend on modifying, that F30 BMW. I had it for like 4 years before I even touched it. I just wanted like a comfortable, luxurious car that I could drive around. And I didn't really know that much about like BMWs in general. I came from like a JDM background. So when I got the 328, I had zero intentions of like modifying it or being like a fast guy. So I just bought the 328 because it was affordable. I bought it for like $24,000. And it was a great car. It was an awesome car. At the end of the day, was it worth it in terms of like performance? Absolutely not. Like we hardly made any gains on it, but it was a fun car to own that, now you guys, you can get F30s. They're so affordable. They're like, you can get them for like 10 grand. Like you can probably even find like a 328 for less than 10 grand. You just have to be careful because, BMW's high mileage, they take a lot of maintenance, but it was a great car. And a lot of people that ask me like, should I get the 328? It really comes down to your budget and like what you're willing to spend to maintain the vehicle. So look, if you can afford a 335, go to the 335. It's a great platform. The N55 is such an incredible platform for power. I loved the N55 in my M2. But starting out with the 328, the N20, was a fantastic, like the perfect place for me to start, because it allowed me to learn a little more about German engineering, BMW, the brand, how these cars work, like what kind of tools you need to work on these cars, just to get my feet wet in this like BMW world. And I learned a ton with that car. And so luckily for me, when I started working on that car, they were becoming a little bit more affordable, which allowed me to gain a bit of an audience, because the majority of people on YouTube are young, they're younger, like they're 20s, I would say. And so the people that were able to afford this car, the 328, were like in their 20s. So it was like the perfect car, the perfect platform to like start modifying on YouTube. And that's really what helped me kind of propel my channel, really like got me my audience, is the F30 BMW. And the fact that, it was becoming this affordable car that people were modifying. So we start there, right? And I wanted to try something completely different. My brother had owned a E90 M3 like when they first came out. He had an E90 M3 that he had ordered directly from the dealership, brand new. And it was beautiful. And when those cars first came out, I was like, oh my God, you have an M3. It was like it was like having a Lamborghini, These cars were so incredible back then, especially the fact that it was like a V8. So I just remember visiting North Carolina when I was younger, and he had gotten this new car, and I got to drive it, and I was like, wow, like the first time driving it, I was like, this is what it must feel like to be successful. Driving this M3, it was like such a surreal experience. And I remember he told me to just like take it to the grocery store and like go get groceries. And I drove it by myself, brand new car, nervous as hell, like so scared that I was going to crash this car. So I park it, and I just remember like walking up to it, this M3, and being like stunned by how beautiful that car was. And I still feel like the E90 and the E92 generation, they're rather timeless. Like they still look really, really good for their age. And not a lot of cars can do that. So BMW's just been really good at doing that. But the E90 and the E92 series and generation, it's just such a sick, special BMW that I don't think we'll ever see again. I know we'll never see that again. With the way that everything is going to turbocharged engines and economical standards and stuff like that, we're not going to see many NA V8s anymore. So it was a special car. And I mean, I'm telling you, that car sounds so good, you know, aside from like the M5, the V10 M5, like, man, the V8 in the S65, that S65 just sounds so good. But it's a pig, you know, it's a slower car down low. You lose all your torque. Like my 328 felt faster in like the torque range because it was a lot more punchy and it was turbocharged. Whereas, you know, the E90 took some time to get rolling. But once you got it up to like highway speeds, high RPMs, that thing ripped. God, it ripped. It was such a cool car. But to this day, I feel like that E90 M3, the build quality of it and the handling and just like the overall way it was built is my favorite. It was so solid and like sturdy. It's the only way to describe that car. It felt very heavy, but it was so solid and sturdy. And I feel like a lot of these newer cars, you're kind of getting away from that. Like the Supra is an incredible car, really the fastest car I've ever owned. But there's a side of it that feels like a toy. Like it just kind of feels like cheap in some places. And even the F series, like my M2, felt cheap in some places because there's more plastic being introduced. And so that's one thing. That was my takeaway from really getting into the E90 M3 and then going, you know, back to the F series with the M2 is you kind of lost this like rawness, this like authenticity of this just naturally aspirated V8 that was like just the build quality was so different and the handling was just insane right out of the gate. You really didn't need to do much to the E90 M3 to make it handle any better. When I put it on coils and I put some nice tires on it and wider wheels, that thing was planted. I mean, it's no wonder why so many people track those E90 generation cars because they just handle so well. So that was my experience with that car, and I love that car. Look, the E90 the S65 platform is so sick. It takes a bit of money to maintain it. You need to make sure if you get one, if I were to do it all over again, personally, I would get, the DCT is really clunky in those cars. So personally, if I did it all over again, I would get a manual, I would get the E92, I would get the carbon top, I would get like an Interlagos or Alpine White again. But that would be like my spec if I did it all over again. I love the E90, but I think that the E92 it's just a little bit sexier. And especially now that I've gone into like more coupes lately, I'm kind of becoming more of a coupe guy. If I did a sedan, I would do like an M5 or something. So great car, loved it. Knew that it was probably time to move on to something else. There's just not, you know, with what I do, YouTube and everything, there's just not a lot out there in the E90 world. In terms of interest, you know, I mean, there definitely are E90 guys who are all about them, and that's great, and I love that car too. But the interest is more in the terms of like the F series right now is very hot, and then obviously the Supra. The Supra is a very hot car to own right now too. And I think that comes down to just affordability and how easily you can make just insane power numbers. So going from the E90 M3 into the M2, when I bought the M2, I actually didn't intend on buying the M2. I went to buy an M4, and it just so happened that like the M4 that I looked at was really just terrible. Like it had a very bad rap on it, body gaps everywhere, probably was in an accident, just a terrible representation of an M4. But I really didn't want to spend like $50,000, $60,000 on an M4. My budget that I wanted to spend was like in the 30s, and it was hard at that time to find an M4 or an M3 F80, you know, in the 30s. It's still hard to find them in the 30s in good quality with decent mileage. So they had happened to have this M2 that was a 2017, and it was the N55 version. But you have to understand, like I was coming from like in the F series, I was coming from an N20. So anything up from the N20 was a benefit to me. It was an upgrade. So the N55, I hadn't experienced it yet, and that was it. Like I drove it. It was a manual. I knew I wanted a manual next again, and I loved it. I just loved the rawness of it, but also getting like the tech side of it, and then just the way that the M2 chassis, how nimble and how stout that engine is, but how like you can just whip that car around. It handles so good. Still one of my favorite chassis to date. If I were to do an M2 again, I would do the S55 version, the comp, because I've already experienced the N55 version. But that car was absolutely sick. Now, I quickly learned the limitations of the N55B in the M2. Obviously, fueling is a big one, and the turbo is a big one. So when you get to a certain point where you're pretty much maxed out, and I made about as much content as I felt comfortable with making without going too far into the car to where I felt like it would greatly devalue the actual value of the car. And that was my biggest thing with that, because I knew that I wasn't like fully invested in the M2. I really loved it. It was a great car, awesome platform, but I knew that I wasn't fully invested in it. So there was no point in me going any further with that car, especially right now in my career. Like, I'm still early on and I can't afford to have 3-4 builds hanging out. I don't have the room. I'm in an apartment complex. I have 2 garages, but one's full of car parts. So I really don't have the room to have multiple builds happening all the time. I knew that my time with the M2 was kind of expiring, and I was kind of just getting bored of the platform, the F-Series in general. I wanted to try something new. So then we moved into the Supra, and I absolutely love the Supra because of the B58, and it's such an incredible platform and engine. And, I'm thinking about what's next for the channel, whether it be like a 340, like we do something with the F-Series, but it's the B58 platform, which would be really interesting. Or I go into the S55 platform, whether it's a M3, M4, M2 comp. But I probably wouldn't do like this M2 CS. I just think that car is way overpriced and totally not worth it. I mean, there are going to be people out there that want to pay, 70, 80,000 for an M2. Cool. I mean, it's a dope ass car. I totally get it. But personally, I would never spend that much because I like to build things. I don't like to buy things already done up. So it makes more sense for me to find something that's stock, that doesn't have all the expensive additions on it, and put those additions on myself and make the content for you guys. So that was kind of the trajectory of everything that happened. If I were to like kind of compare, like a lot of people ask me, what was your favorite car that you've owned? It's hard to answer that, because each of these cars like really had their place in the development of this project and this channel. And I actually enjoyed each of them for their own reasons. Like the F30 328, like it's not a fast car, but it was the brick. It was like the brick of this channel. It built everything that I have now. So I have so much respect for that car and that platform. Very slow car. But, it was a great car. It was a great starting point, and I learned so much. I couldn't have gotten to where I am today without having that car. So it's like that car was very important. And then obviously the M3, for how rare and special that car is with the V8. Like that's why I like that car, and it's hard to compare that to like a manual M2 or a brand new Supra. And then we have the M2, where it was my first time experiencing the N55. Loved that car because it was the only manual car that we've had in the family so far. Now, I've had plenty of manual cars before, but it was the first time doing a manual car on the channel. And the excitement of driving that car, I mean, I got to be honest, going to the Supra and not having a manual transmission, dude, at first, I like totally convinced myself that it wasn't going to be a big deal. But I'm just a manual guy. And it was after a month or so, I was like, man, I really miss driving a manual. And I don't know what it is. It's just there's something special and fun about having a manual transmission car. And it just gets dull. Paddles after a while just gets kind of dull. It doesn't matter how fast the car is to me. So if I bought an F80 or an F82 or an M2 S55, 100% getting manual again. I don't care if DCT is faster. That's not important to me. My whole thing with being like the fastest is there's always going to be someone faster than you with more money. So you're just chasing something that you're never going to quite get to the finish line with, in my opinion. But I have mad respect for everyone, all the people out there that builds and just want to be the fastest. And that's totally cool. But I'm just on the other side. I'm more on like the experience side and just enjoying the car and having fun with it. And for me, the manual is just 100% the way to go. So when I got the Supra, after a while, I was like, oh man, I'm really starting to miss that manual transmission. I still don't understand, and for the life of me, I have no idea why they wouldn't offer that car in a manual. Like, it just seems so weird to me that this is a tuner car. Like, you guys made this car for tuners. Why in the world would you not offer a manual transmission? Like, that just seems so bizarre to me. But here we are. There are rumors of it in 2022 or 23. They're offering a manual, but like those are just rumors, you know, how people like to talk in the forums. So to compare all the cars, right? All the cars together, it's so hard because I really liked each one of them for their own reasons. I think in like when it comes to total package, the M2 was like really there for me. The perfect car would have been like the M2 with a B58. Like that would have been the perfect car. I know that I know that, you know, you can get the M2 with the S55 obviously, but the B58's different, bro. Like how easily it is to work on that car and like make power, and it's not too expensive. Like the S55 is it's tougher to work on. Everything takes longer. It's very expensive. Crank hub fix, right? A lot of these things where the B58, like you don't really have to do much. Like you just get in and go and like downpipe, tune, you're good to go. I think that like the perfect car, because I really like the wide, the width of the M2. Like some people are saying, well, why don't you just get like an M240 and then like, you know, like that could be your build because that has the B58. For me personally, I really like the body of the M2, like love the M2 styling. Like I still have something that I just love the M2 styling. The perfect car would have been the M2 with the B58. Just my opinion, but who knows what they'll do in the future. I don't think that we'll ever see a B58 in an M2. I think that, I don't know, maybe we will. I mean, we have the G80 coming out with the S58, right? And so wouldn't it be cool if we saw a new M2 come out with like a B58 rendition, right? Like kind of how they did with the Supra versus like the 340. It's a different rendition, B58. And then what if they had like another M2 competition that had the S58? Like, so let's remind ourselves, like the S58, my brother has it in his X3M and like 2 modifications, and he's in the 600s, and it's an insanely fast car. Like you guys, the S58, we're about to see some crazy shit come out when these M3s get on the road and the N4s and they start tuning them and driving them, and we're going to see some crazy shit. Like whether you like the kidney grills or not, these cars are going to hit. So I guess if I really had to like answer the question, like I would say like if I could have the perfect car, it would be the M2 with the B58. But there are still things with the Supra, or like it would be the Supra with a manual transmission. You know what I mean? Like it would be like that. I still really like the Supra because the Supra has like a crazy curb appeal that none of my cars have ever had. Like you see a lot of M2s, you see a lot of M3s, you see a lot of F30s, but you don't see a lot of Supras. And when people see them, it's almost like they're seeing a Ferrari. Like when I tell people that the Supra is $50,000, like they're like, what? It's a $50,000, it looks like a $100,000 car. It looks like a supercar. It's got a crazy curb appeal. So I just thought this was like an interesting topic, and it's a question that I get a lot. Which car do you like the best? And it's really hard to answer that, you guys, because I like all these cars for their own reasons. I would say that the M2 is close to being the best for me. It's like a tie between the Supra and the M2 because I really like the heart and like some of the styling on the Supra, and I really like the M2 and the manual, and so I guess it's not the most straightforward answer, but it is an answer, and maybe you guys can resonate with it. Comment down below, you guys. Tell me what your favorite car that you've owned, or what your favorite build you've seen on the channel, and what you hope to see in the future. I am taking suggestions, so comment down below. Thank you guys for watching today's podcast. We're going to be knocking these out, man. I got a lot of them coming to you. Love you guys. See you in the next one. Peace.